Hello, and welcome to this podcast, which is designed to support your understanding of IRTBs in preparation for military education courses, for late entry commissioning assessments, or indeed for your working life. This podcast will not tell you how to produce the perfect IRTB, as the word perfect means different things to different people. We will see that the format of the IRTB is open to subjectivity and fads. When you are set an IRTB for a summative assessment, you should read the instructions carefully to ensure that you meet the criteria of that assessment. This podcast will show you a standard way to write an IRTB and the content which should be contained in each paragraph. To start with, let's look at the overarching documentation for defence writing. Firstly, we have the Joint Service Publication 101, JSP 101. The latest version was released in 2019, replacing the 2010 version. The 2019 version is far less prescriptive than the 2010 version. Many critics argue that this leads to ambiguity. For example, the 2019 JSP doesn't explain the size of margins when setting up a page. You may find various other details missing from JSP 101. For this, you may have to refer back to Chapter 6 of the 2010 version of JSP 101. With the 2019 version of JSP 101, there are several templates for you to follow. This has also caused confusion. Let's look at the template for a brief. Here we can see a section entitled Headings. This is designed to explain to the reader about types of headings in the document. It should not be included in the template. To confuse matters further, we have the 2016 version of the Army Staff Standard. This is the document which provides guidance to Army staff officers for various tasks. This includes several templates. Here is the template for a brief or a point brief. As this is an Army publication, this should out-trump the JSP, which is for all three services. However, this predates the latest version of JSP 101, thus causing even more ambiguity. You should now be able to see that there are elements of subjectivity creeping into our IRTB. Let's now look at the IRTB. Firstly, what is an IRTB? Well, an IRTB is a submission. It is designed to seek a decision or an agreement to a proposed course of action. In simple terms, you may have found something which requires improvement in your unit, and you have an idea of how to rectify this. An IRTB provides a structure to put your argument across to your CO or chain of command. IRTB stands for Issue, Recommendations, Timing and Backgrounds. Let's look at the layout of an IRTB. This example of an IRTB was originally produced by a CLM student. All original names have been removed, the formatting changed to suit the newer JSP, and some of the content has been amended for the purpose of this podcast. This is by no means a perfect example. As with any piece of work, there is always room for improvement. Notice the page is set up with a 2 cm margin all round. The font style and size is set to Arial 12. All tab spaces are universally set to 1 cm. Notice there is no protective marking in the header or footer. Anything official does not need to be marked. If a document is deemed official sensitive or above, then this would have been inputted into the header and footer. In the top line, we have the to and from information, written in bold as per JSP 101. The date is written in full. JSP 101 has moved away from abbreviated dates. The third line shows the file reference. This reference number is specific to you and your unit's filing system. This may be given to you for an assessment. The subject heading is case sensitive and in bold. This should highlight the main subject of the IRTB. Below the subject heading, we have our first group heading, Issue. This is one of 4 group headings, the others being Recommendations, Timing and Background, hence IRTB. A group heading partitions the document into different sections. They are floating and sit flush against the margin. Remember the purpose of the IRTB. You want to recommend some changes. For this to happen, there must be an issue. The issue paragraph describes what the problem is in no more than 2 or 3 sentences. It is designed to make the recipient listen to what you have to say. If you explain to the CEO that there is a problem with the unit, he will want to know what you have in mind to rectify this. In our example, the author explains that due to the current working environment, there is a retention issue within the medics. The author has highlighted that this may reduce the effectiveness of med cover with potential life-threatening consequences. That is all that is required here. Any extra detail explaining the issue will be covered later in the background section. Let's now look at the recommendations paragraph. You may only require 1 recommendation for an IRTB, but for an assessment, I would suggest incorporating 3 recommendations, as we have in our example here. Notice the structure. Underneath the group heading, the paragraph is numbered 2. The first line is simply inviting the recipient to agree with your recommendations. We do not require anything more. Below this sentence, you will see 3 sub-paragraphs. Each sub-paragraph, numbered A, B, and C, is a separate recommendation. These recommendations are your ideas, which when implemented, should help to resolve the issue you have mentioned in paragraph 1. Notice, the recommendations are written in bold. The recommendations should only be 2 or 3 sentences to give the outline of your recommendation. The extra detail explaining your justification for the recommendation will follow in the background section. Try to make your recommendations specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant. It should be specific in the sense that you should identify a person who is responsible for the change. Looking at our example, the first recommendation has named the ops officer as the person responsible for this change. It should be measurable, in that it should be a specific outcome. In our example, the first recommendation is asking for 1 day per month to be dedicated to med training. This is a definite product. You should avoid non-specific terms. A lot of students will write recommendations such as subunits should devote more time to training. Well, this doesn't give a set time. More time to some may mean just 5 minutes. This may not have been your desired outcome. Achievable and relevant is probably stating the obvious. It is no use offering an unrealistic recommendation or a recommendation which has nothing to do with the issue. For example, there is no point recommending that the CO should stand down the battalion for 6 months to improve morale. This just isn't going to happen. Ensure that your recommendations are individualistic, i.e., they are not all related to one recommendation. Often, students will give a valid first recommendation and then follow up with more recommendations on the same theme. For example, let's say the issue is a lack of leadership displayed within junior ranks. A valid recommendation may be to have an all ranks brief by the RSM to highlight the importance of the Army Leadership Code. This is great, but a follow-on recommendation explaining that CSMs should allow junior NCOs the time to attend the brief is not a separate recommendation. It is just an extension of the first. This information could be added in the background paragraphs. Now let's move on to the timing paragraph. The timing paragraph, paragraph 3, describes when you want the recipient of the IRTB to make a decision on the recommendations. A common mistake is that students often describe a time when you want the recommendations to be implemented. This is not the case. The timing paragraph begins with a paragraph heading. You have 3 options: routine, priority, and urgent. Routine is for anything more than 1 week. Priority is for anything between 48 hours and 1 week, and urgent is for anything within 48 hours. You should give the date when a decision is to be made, and then you should write a sentence explaining why you have imposed this timeline. In our example, the author explained that a decision by this date will allow the implementation of the recommendations and failure to do so will mean a loss in currency for the medics. Let's now move to the background section. This is the meat of the document. Think of everything above as the highlights. It may well be that your recipient reads the highlights and agrees with everything you say, therefore he or she may not need to look at the background. But more often than not, the recipient will want to see the justification for your issue and recommendations. The first paragraph in the background section is paragraph 4, the context. Notice the paragraph heading of context, in bold. The context paragraph gives all the detail about the issue you highlighted in paragraph 1. This is where you can sell the issue to the recipient. It may be the case that the CO, for example, doesn't believe the issue you have mentioned is a problem. Well, the context is going to explain in detail that there is a problem, and if it isn't addressed, there may be severe consequences. In order to achieve this, and this goes for all the background paragraphs, you should make clear arguments supported with evidence and explanation. In our example, the issue is the high workload of CMTs and the subsequent retention problem. To evidence this, the author has used examples. The author then explains the consequences of this. They have analysed the issue and explained the consequences. Where possible, any point that you make should be supported by references in the form of footnotes. Here, the author has used the Army Directive on Medical Provision for training to support their argument. They have also used AXO 3365 to highlight the need for CPD. This tells the CO that the author isn't just putting their opinions across, it is supported by Army policy. By the end of the paragraph, the recipient should be under no illusion that there is an issue which needs rectifying. A method we can use to structure our background paragraphs is the PEEL method. This is a useful tool in both written and verbal communication. Essentially, we make a point, we evidence that point, we then explain the point, and finally, we link it to the main subject. Relating this to our example, the point is, overworked medical staff is causing a lack of retention and subsequent loss of med effectiveness. The author then gives evidence to support this. An explanation is then given to identify the importance of this. During the explain phase, we need to carry out analysis. One way to carry out analysis is to ask, so what? You may well have heard of the so what analysis. There is a good example of this in the final stages of this context paragraph. The author talks of the poor retention of the medics. So what? Well, this means that there is a quick turnover of medics. So what? Well, this means that there is a lack of continuity. So what? Well, this means that the new medics will take time to find their feet. So what? Well, this means that the medics will be less able to deliver high-class medical support for the unit. So what? Ultimately, this could result in loss of life. Finally, we have the link. This sentence links the paragraph to the main subject. We can now use this format for the remaining background paragraphs. Paragraphs 5, 6 and 7 each relate to a recommendation. Paragraph 5 describes recommendation A, paragraph 6 describes B, and 7 describes C. In these paragraphs, you need to explain how your recommendation is going to rectify or improve your issue. Use the PEEL format to assist you. Notice that on each paragraph, the recommendation you are referring to is copied word for word in bold at the end of the paragraph. In our example, paragraph 5 supports a recommendation for 1 training day per month to ensure medics remain current. Notice the paragraph heading. Each of the recommendation related background paragraphs will have a short heading describing the content of the paragraph. This is written in bold. The author has used medical policy to support the need for remaining current. The following sentence explains the importance of this and the so what by explaining that if currency lapses, medics will have to post out to get more training. The author has also demonstrated this potential problem with an example from another unit. If possible, if your suggestion has been used elsewhere to rectify a similar issue, for example, in another unit or context, you should provide evidence of this. The successful outcome would add weight to your argument. In the background paragraphs, you might want to explain how the recommendation is to be implemented. Convince the CO that you have really thought about it. In our example, in paragraph 6, the author has explained how the recommendation will help the issue, but they have not mentioned how, for example, the working from home policy will be monitored and resourced. Will everyone require a ModNet laptop? This is something that the CO may want to know. The desired end state of the background paragraphs is for the reader to fully believe that your recommendations will help to solve the issue and benefit the unit. Looking at the template for submissions, there are other paragraphs you could include, such as financial aspects and presentation. These are normally reserved for higher level IRTBs, but be aware of them should you be required to include them for an assessment. If you want, you can finish off with a summary paragraph, but this is not required. The IRTB is finished with a signature block, annex list, and distribution or copied to list. If you have included annexes to provide extra information for the recipient, the list of annexes would sit in between the signature block and the distribution list. This brings us to the end of the podcast. We have looked at the structure of an IRTB. Please pay attention to the detail in the background paragraphs. This is arguably the most important part of the IRTB and demonstrates your ability to structure an argument clearly and logically. Implement the peel structure to help with this. In future, when it comes to an IRTB assessment, for example on an LECAB, you may be given a document and be asked to give recommendations on how to implement this policy into your unit. It is important that you reference this document throughout your work.